Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Mayers from WisPolitics.com, and welcome to the May 28th virtual luncheon. We usually have these at the Madison Club, but today we're online because of the coronavirus crisis. These luncheons are sponsored by some generous sponsors: Hush Blackwell, American Family Insurance, Xcel Energy, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Hospital Association. We have some future events coming up. We have on June 11th about the ag crisis in the state and across the Midwest, and on June 22nd with Congressman Brian Stile of Janesville. But today we have a great program with two expert people on this subject, and we're noting the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the United States and talking about recruiting and training female candidates for state and local office. So I want to welcome in former Republican Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch, who's also a jobs ambassador for ABC of Wisconsin, and Emerge Wisconsin leader Erin Forrest. So please come on board, and welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks so much for having us.
So the format today for all those who are watching and in the webinar is I ask questions of Becky and Erin, and then we take questions from you via the chat function or questions that have been submitted in advance. So let's just go right off to a question for both of you, and I'll let Erin answer this one first. So where does Wisconsin stand in terms of female office holders and candidates? What kind of progress has been made? I was looking at some stats. In 1975, about 8% of the Wisconsin legislature was female membership, and today it's 27%. But there really hasn't been much in the way of gains since about 1983. So Erin, where do you think Wisconsin stands in terms of female representation in elected office?
Sure. So we are ranked 30th, I think, for state legislatures nationwide, and our other rankings sort of vary. A thing that I think people don't think about a lot is that in the history of Wisconsin, we've elected 3 women to federal office ever, if you count Tammy Baldwin twice. Because Tammy Baldwin and Gwen Moore are the only women we've ever elected to federal office, and they're both still serving. So I think some of this stuff can be sort of challenging to get perspective on when you're sort of living through the history of it happening, which is what we're talking about. And then our local elected office isn't that different than the state legislature, right? We're really hovering between 25 and 30% for women's representation in basically everything in Wisconsin.
So, I mean, but it's still with Erin here. Does that disappoint you? I mean, it seems like you said, it seems like we've been at a plateau since, if just by the legislative numbers, since about 1983.
Well, we have been. Yeah, we have been. And I think that I'm sure we're going to get into this more. The problem isn't always intentional, right? But the solutions have to be, which is why I do the work that I do. When you think about the sort of nature of political office, right? Most incumbents win. Most incumbents are white guys, right? And when incumbents retire and they recruit someone to replace them, most of us have very homogenous networks as human beings. And so when we're looking for a replacement, we're looking for someone who's like us. And someone who's like us, for most political incumbents, is another white guy. Right? And so it's not, and that's usually not, sometimes it is, but usually it's not like a grand conspiracy to keep women out of political office. Like the problem isn't intentional, but the solutions have to be. There have to be proactive solutions, or what we will continue to see is a stagnation.
Okay, let's go Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch now on this. Where do you think Wisconsin stands, and I guess how can it be improved?
Well, Jeff, Erin, you're right. The stats show Wisconsin is pretty much right in the middle of the country, which is not where we would like to be. I personally would love to see more women holding public office. And that's why Erin is right. We have to be more intentional. And I think that's also why we see people being more intentional. I'm sorry, guys, this is what happens when you do a Zoom call from the Kleefisch house and there's any sort of package delivery, the dog loses her mind.
Well, that's
so
okay.
my apologies there,
one.
but I'm not going to apologize for what I say next, which is a personal story. You guys know that my husband, Joel, was in the Wisconsin State Assembly for 14 years. And when he started thinking about getting out of good governance, we started thinking at home, who could we ask to run to replace Joel? My first thought was a woman who ran a terrific special needs ministry from our church, Barbara Deterrent. And I'm proud to say that I was able to convince Barb that this was going to be a really good idea. But, you know, there are barriers sometimes to convincing women to run for and serve in political office. And one of the things was the thing that Barb brought up very first. What about my family? And so we were able to work through those barriers and convince her that this would be a really great way to not only serve her family, but her community and her state and country. And sure enough, I'm now able to call my friend Barb state representative.
Right. So that's a successful recruitment. Yeah. So staying here with you, Becky. So you've done national recruiting, you've done state recruiting for Republican candidates. And I'm wondering, how do you think this year is going to set up? The filing deadline's on Monday. How do you think this year is going to set up?
I think we're going to set up really well. I know I checked in this morning. I know that we're going to have at least 5 women running for Wisconsin State Senate among our Republican colleagues, and I believe 18 running for Wisconsin State Assembly, and I'm really proud of that. I also know of 2 women running for United States Congress, and I'm excited for Wisconsin's future. Among my GOP colleagues, I think that there is a great thirst to have more representation among women.
Okay, back to Erin from Emerge Wisconsin. How do you think is the filing deadline's Monday, June 1, and do you think that it's going to move the needle on the Democratic side of things?
Maybe some. I think that we're seeing some interesting things in 2020, somewhat similar to what we saw in 2018. We heard a lot in 2018 about it being the year of the woman, and in many ways, it was the year of the Democratic woman, right? Because the greater increase in numbers that year because of enthusiasm was on our side. So a record number of women, right, ran for Congress in 2018. So did a record number of men. So some of these things can be, it's not always as cut and dry as it seems. And I'm looking forward to seeing, what the final counts end up being on June 1st. But I think it's going to be, hopefully another year of steady progress.
Right. So this year, we have the presidential election in Wisconsin. We have no Senate or gubernatorial election. We have congressional elections and state legislative elections as a reminder of who will be on the ballot. But staying with you, Erin. So, the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, has promised to pick a woman as a running mate. What kind of impact is that going to have, do you think, on female candidates and the women vote?
I don't know how much more impact we can have on the women vote. Like, the gender gap has been growing every cycle between Democrats and Republicans, and there are a lot of policy reasons for why. And that's some of why we're seeing that with voters, we're seeing that with elected officials, right? But as for the impact it has, we can sort of look back. There's some really clear data that show that when women run for office, it's easier for the next woman to run. And so the importance of having a woman on the ticket can't be overstated. It's critically important. It's harder to be what you can't see, right? And that example set When women run, win or lose, they're making it easier for the next woman to run.
Okay, so on to Becky now. The former Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch. What do you think the impact of Biden pledging to pick a woman as his running mate? What kind of impact will that have, do you think, in the election?
Jeff, I think if this is an attempt at reaching Republican women voters, I don't know that it is going to work. I think among my peers in the Republican Party, most women believe that a candidate should be the best person for the job, the most talented, the most qualified, and they usually set identity politics aside and may even be a little insulted by the idea that he is choosing someone specifically for their packaging. Now, what I mean by that is that he's basically signaling to America that he's choosing the best of the Democrat women, not just the best of the Democrats to be vice president of the United States.
Okay.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Erin.
So the whole notion of identity politics is sort of frustrating to me because it's not about packaging, it's about perspective. And it's about the way we walk through the world and experience things differently because of our identities, because of the color of our skin, because of who we love, because we're women, right? Policies impact us differently and our perspectives are different. And that's the point. It's not saying, he's not saying I need this package at the table, or this is a perspective that's missing, and I need to make sure that this perspective is at the table, which is not the same thing.
Erin, maybe you could coach your presidential candidate to say that, because I think that's a much better way of putting it than what we've seen in the media, because I would agree that much of this is about perspective, and that has to do with what qualities women may bring to the table, whether it is in governance or corporate leadership, that you may not necessarily find packaged in a male perspective. But I think when it comes down to identity politics, simply judging someone by their cover is not usually the best way to do it.
And I just think that that's a false notion. I don't think that that's what happens, right? Like when Sarah Palin was vice presidential nominee, right? I didn't go vote for John McCain. Neither did any other Democratic women I know, right? Like that. I think it's a false. I just don't think that's true. I don't think that anybody votes for someone solely based on that, right? Like there are a whole lot of other things that come along with it, but I also really do think those perspectives are important. And
I agree. Perspective is absolutely essential, especially when you're recruiting candidates.
So you two don't really need me in this conversation, right? All right, no, but I'm gonna persist. I'm gonna continue to be in the conversation.
Nevertheless, he persisted.
Yes, all right. So maybe let's, since we just had that discussion about perspective, the rural-urban divide is no secret in Wisconsin or across the country, and I'm wondering whether when you're recruiting a candidate for a rural district or a rural elected office holder type position, that is it different from the party perspective? Like, are Democrats recruiting somebody different in the rural part of Wisconsin than Republicans? Let's start with Erin on that one.
I mean, I don't know that we're recruiting someone different from Republicans. I think that anytime we're looking for a candidate for public office, we want someone who has deep ties to the district, who understands the needs of the district, and who's a good fit for the district. So, I assume that Republicans are looking for the same thing. Do we have different ideas about what that means? Yes. But I think we're both coming at it from the same angle in that way.
Okay. Becky?
I would agree. You're looking for someone with deep ties to the district. If you're looking in rural Wisconsin and you're looking for the chief industries, usually you're looking for someone who either has colleagues, peers, or relatives with a deep understanding or a personal deep understanding of those things that move the economy and move the community forward. Not only that, but there are differences in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure in rural Wisconsin than there are in urban Wisconsin. And you want someone who can speak effectively to those things and also have individual policy ideas on those things. I think I probably speak even for both of us when I say, when we are looking for candidates, regardless of what they look like, you want someone with passion and you want someone with discipline.
Okay, so you talked before, staying with Becky here, you talked before about getting Representative Dietrich to say yes, right? What's the biggest deterrent for getting a good female candidate? You've spotted the good female candidate. You think that right profile, right on the issues, whatever. What's the biggest deterrent to getting them to say yes?
Oftentimes, Jeff, it has to do with the season of life they are in, and I would say it differs by individual. If you're talking to a millennial, sometimes the financial insecurity of jumping into a campaign, understanding how much time they're going to have to devote to it, becomes their biggest barrier, knowing that they may have to take time off of their job or arrange for a different schedule or more flexibility. They're going to have to spend less time with friends and family and on hobbies if they're going to be knocking on doors. But that's one of the things that we look for. Once again, passion. If you move on to someone who is a little bit more like me, when I ran for lieutenant governor, I was a young mom. Violet was 3, Ella was 7 at the time. My kids were little. And they had the experience of Joel running for political office, but never me. I was at home with them at the time and working my small media and marketing company. So this was a very different experience. And so my passion had to outweigh my concerns about stepping away from my parenting duties for X number of hours during the day or during the week. For someone who is past their essential momming years and onto retirement, your passion for politics and governance, your activism has to outweigh any concerns you might have about what your kids might find on social media or in an article they may read or see shared across their bandwidth at the school or their church or whatever other community activities. And so at every season of life, I think there are a variety of different barriers that you have to talk through and determine whether you have the passion to run through the tape or whether it might be a time to encourage someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on to Erin. Yeah, I would think that maybe the social media aspect might make it even tougher. From your perspective, Erin, though, when you're talking to candidates trying to get her to say yes, what do you think the biggest deterrent is?
Well, there are a lot, and there's good data out there on this too. I will say the social media and that sort of stuff tends to be much harder on people's friends and family than it is on the candidates themselves, in my experience. Like it can be easier to brush that stuff off of yourself than for someone you care about. So there's certainly some of that. The chore gap, right, is still super real. The second shift that women work, regardless of their relationship status, regardless of who makes more money in their family, if they're partnered, right? Like women are still responsible for more things at home, the management of and the physical doing of tasks. And that has not changed enough. And so that's a barrier we see. I'm seeing less concern about being able to raise the money, I think, because there's more support and training around it. But there are also these internal barriers, like very frequently. And frankly, my reaction to being recruited to run for office that I didn't know at the time was like the thing women do is to say, well, there has to be someone more qualified than me to do this, right? Like that is an incredibly common reaction for women. And it's part of why Emerge is structured the way it is, right? Like we don't need a 6-month training program to make women qualified to run for public office. Women are already qualified to run for office. Like what we do is build up that support system so that they're surrounded by other women who know what they're going through. We can plan for those life things, right? To help them figure out who's going to do the things in their life that they were doing so that they can run, and to really talk about some of those myths, right? Like you've heard women won't apply to a job until they meet 10 of 10 job criteria. Men will apply when they get to 6, right? It's the same for public office. There are just differences in how we're socialized, and overcoming some of that is really important. There is a myth out there that says you have to ask a woman to run 7 times before she'll say yes. There's truth behind it. It's not true. There's no magic number. Like, asking a woman 7 times isn't going to do it. But who asks matters. Like, it matters that the lieutenant governor recruited Representative Dietrich, right? Because she is seen as someone who knows what she's talking about, right? So when we can't brush it off as just flattery, when the request comes from someone who we really think knows what they're talking about, that you have a better chance of getting a woman to say yes to running. And sometimes you do have to ask multiple times, and we hear it differently, right? There's this really funny anecdote in a story that I read about one of these studies that was done. And it was essentially like, you could be at the airport bar and CNN is on, and a bartender comments to a guy like, "Oh, you really pay attention to what's going on." And the man will consider himself recruited to run for office. And you could say to a woman, "You should run for office. You'd be really great." And she'd brush it off like, "Oh, you're right." But there is some truth to that. And it's not biology. It's not inherently how we are. It's how we're socialized.
I think you're saying that men are conceited, but that's okay. I get that. Okay. All right. No. I am joking. All right. Okay. So, because some men might be offended with what I just said. All right. But anyway, let's just, so let's face it, the big prize in any state is the governorship. Okay. So Wisconsin's one of 20 states that's never had a female governor. And right now there are 9 states with female governors. Now, we're not in a gubernatorial election year, but I don't think it's any secret, former Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch, that you're looking at running for governor. So why do you think it is that Wisconsin hasn't had a female governor after all these years, since we were a leader on women's suffrage?
We were indeed. We were the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment. We're celebrating 100 years of women's right to vote this year, Jeff. And as you know, right after I served as Wisconsin's lieutenant governor, I spent some time in Washington, D.C., running a very small federal agency whose job it was, as certified by the United States Congress, to plan for this outstanding anniversary. In fact, I wore this lapel pin today that is the jailhouse door of Occoquan Workhouse, and also symbolizes DC jail, where women were taken after they protested, in most cases silently, with picket signs, simply for equal rights at the ballot box. And I think it's something that Erin and I and all of the mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives of the state can celebrate this year and every year when we get our I voted sticker. I don't know why Wisconsin has not yet elected a woman governor, but I think it will happen soon.
Okay, so that's a non-comment on your candidacy, but you're looking at it, right?
I think you were right in your previous statement that was a non-comment.
Okay. All right. Okay, Erin, why do you think that is? Wisconsin, again, Wisconsin was a leader in the suffrage movement, but Wisconsin hasn't elected a female governor. Why?
Yeah, so I want to say a couple of things. First off, about the 19th Amendment and the centennial. It's incredibly important. It's a time that I think we all need to reflect. I also think we need to acknowledge that it didn't get the right to vote for all women, right? Like Native American women didn't have citizenship and were not allowed to vote. Black women were, subject to Jim Crow laws and realistically didn't have the right to vote. Some still don't, right? And women were, and still are, to this day, there are places in this country specifically where you have to run campaigns letting women know that their husband won't know who they voted for and that they get to make their own choice. Like, this is still, I think we talk a lot about the history of the women's movement, the history of the civil rights movement, as if they're the distant past, and they're not. These are things that continue on now, right? And again, it goes back to that. It's hard to see history when you're living it and these changes, but it's not done and it's not a settled matter. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that. As to why we've never had a woman governor, there are differences in how, when women run for legislative office, we win at the same rate as men. We're more likely to face a primary. I believe that is in part sexism and in part where women are more likely to run. There are like a number of factors there. But we do still have a disadvantage in executive office. Like, we still have a problem with women in executive roles, and it's deep seated, and it's not on the surface, and it's not something most of us consciously are aware of. It's also not limited to politics. There are more Fortune 500 CEOs named John than women, right? Like we have a problem with women being the boss, and I don't know how we fix it until we talk about it more. Like, we have gotten much more comfortable with women being in collaborative decision-making bodies. Still clearly not where we need to be because we're not at parity, but we're not where we need to be with women in executive office. It's mayors, it's governors, it's obviously we've never had a woman president, even though she got more votes, right? Like, it's a problem, and it's not limited to this, and I don't know how we fix it until we start talking about it differently than we have been.
Well, I agree, talk is great, but Jeff, Erin, I think action is even better. And that's why it's so important to be out there recruiting more women to run for political office. And I think that's why what you're doing, Erin, and what I'm doing in recruiting women across the state of Wisconsin to build the talent pipeline is absolutely essential to the future of our leadership.
Okay, I'm going to go to some audience questions. And again, a reminder to the audience, if you didn't submit a question, you can submit one now via the chat function on your screen. This question, what is the first step to becoming involved in politics? And it called to mind, I'm going to add, a lot of successful politicians, men and women, start off, being on the school board or being on the city council or being on the village board. And I'm wondering whether you think that, let's start with Becky, whether you think that is a good primer for people to get involved in politics.
I suppose I am the world's worst person, Jeff, to talk
yes, you're
about
not the primary example.
School board, and then county board, and city council, then mayor, then county executive, state representative, state senator, and then lieutenant governor, because I skipped over a lot of those steps. And I think early on, that's why a lot of people were confused by me as a candidate, because I didn't stand in line. I felt compelled to run for lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin. I felt I had a lot to offer, and I thought some of the skills that I offered in my set would be useful to the state. Now, all of that worked, but that's not to say that that is the correct path for every single person. Everybody is different. That's why I mentioned the different seasons of life and how you have to approach overcoming barriers differently with every single individual. So I would say the first step in getting involved in politics isn't even running for political office. It's caring, being deeply invested in your family and community, caring enough to read or show up at your city council meeting, your county board meeting, your school board meeting, and voicing your opinion. Because if you care that much, then chances are that care will lead to activism. And once you are an activist, you have the passion to not just be approached, but decide for yourself that you'd like to run for political office because you have some views and some policy ideas that ought to be heard in the public square. And that's one of the coolest things about America, that if you have something good to offer, you're allowed to offer it up. And so I encourage those women who are watching this conversation today to consider running for public office, because it's important that our voices are heard.
Erin, what's your take on getting involved, and do you have to be a local office first?
No, you don't have to be. It helps, and there are certainly a lot of people. Most of the people in the state senate were in elected office first. It's more true of women, but it's true of men too. I like to joke that plan commission is how they get you, because you don't actually have to run for public office first. There are lots of different public appointments to serve on boards and commissions that are also an option to sort of get your feet wet and to learn things. And it's a great opportunity to learn a ton and to serve your community. And I think to get a greater appreciation for what happens in government. I think that there are a lot of paths. I think that there is also, there is tremendous value in serving in local elected office because that's the thing you want to do and you never want to do anything else, right? So I think that it's great to use it as a path and to learn and to serve your community along the way. I think it's great if you want to just do it and stay there. I also wanted to make just one more note about school board. So in Wisconsin, women were allowed to vote in school board elections and run in school board elections before we had suffrage. And so, unsurprisingly, the place where we have the best representation for women is school boards. It's still not parity, but it's in the 40s. And part of that is, right, like schools and kids were like a socially acceptable place for women to have a say and continue to be that. But also part of it is, that's the thing we've been doing the longest. And the thing we've been doing the longest is the place we're closest to parity. And so just jumping back to the executive office thing once, right? Like it's the public getting used to things a little bit at a time, and then people like us pushing for progress. It's the combination of those two things that's going to keep making this better.
Right, and we have, just as a note, we have 2 women who've already declared to run for the state school superintendent next year. So maybe that sort of goes with that. I didn't know that bit of history. That's very very interesting. There's another question here, and maybe these are some people who are, some women who are thinking about running. Why don't the political parties assist in funding women who are running for local offices? Erin? Or maybe they do, and they just don't know about how to access the funding.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's some, the premise of the question is a little bit off because political parties themselves don't always fund
the candidates.
Yeah. And so we have a fair amount of dedicated infrastructure on the Democratic side, right? We have Emily's List that does a little bit of training and a lot of funding and working hand in hand with Democratic pro-choice women. We have, right, Emerge, who were really focused on the like training and overall support and network part of it. And so we're not the party, but we're both big D Democratic organizations, right? Like we're aligned with the party, we're partnered with the party, and we don't pretend that we're not, right? So I think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there from folks about what parties do and don't do, and also who parties are. When people are like, the party should, and I was like, I have great news for you. Do you know who the party is? It's you. You're the party. And so I think that there's definitely a lot more, that can be done there. But the way to do that is to like get in and get to work. I've been a county party chair. It's a lot of work and not always a ton of help. But there's plenty of room to get involved if this is something you care about, whether you want to run or you want to help other people run.
All right, staying with Erin Forrest, the leader of Emerge Wisconsin. What about the fundraising aspect? I mean, I think that's a turnoff for a lot of candidates, a lot of new candidates, and so what do you tell them when you're training a potential candidate? What do you tell them about fundraising?
There's a lot of things. A thing that I like to do with candidates when we're talking about fundraising is ask how they felt when they've been asked to contribute to something they care about, right? And the answer is never. I hate that person and I never want them to talk to me again, which is the fear we have about fundraising, right? That we're going to ask someone for money and they're going to decide that they hate us and they never want to talk to us again. It's not going to happen. Like, that's not how this works. So we talk a little bit about that. We talk about what it is. And I think as women and as Midwesterners, there is a lot of discomfort in feeling like you are asking someone else to give you money. Mm-hmm. But that's what political fundraising is, asking someone to invest in a shared vision for a different future. And so we really talk a lot about what it is and what it isn't, and acknowledge that it's uncomfortable. It's part of why we have people do it together and get to meet other people who are doing the same thing at the same time. I would love to see a world where campaigns were financed in a different way. But I am not 100% opposed to money in politics, because it's one way that people can participate in our democracy, right? And I think that communicating with voters is really important. And so I get a little frustrated when people are like, well, I'm not going to raise money. Well, great. How are you going to talk to voters then? Because that's what you need to do.
Right. Let's go to.
Jeff, I would add to what Erin said and say it is a proving ground for how much hustle you have. And it is truly an investment in the candidate and their vision for the future. And if you have enough confidence as a candidate to run for political office, then by all means, shouldn't you have enough confidence to ask other people to be on your team? I grew up the daughter of a Fuller Brush salesman who switched to envelope sales by the time I was born. He taught me how to sell essentially door to door in Detroit, which is where most of his big customers were. We were based in Toledo. And growing up the daughter of an envelope salesman, at the advent of the internet and email provided a whole bunch of challenges. And so I learned at the foot of the master, my dad, what it meant to hear no and then rebound from it and be better and more swift, adaptable, flexible, and come back with a better pitch. And I think that's one of the things that we have to help coach our candidates through, because asking someone to invest in your vision, your ideas for better tomorrows, for the state, for their community, is something that's noble and worthy, and they should be encouraged to do it.
Okay, so here's another question from a viewer. What perspectives do you think women are more likely than men to bring to the table? So let's just stay with you, former Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch.
Well, I think some of the qualities I look for in candidates in particular that I think women tend percentage-wise to possess a little bit more than their male colleagues and peers is collaboration ability, and I would say a default to listening first, talking second. When I mentioned that I look for passion and discipline, discipline is one of the most important things a candidate can have. You can't come out of the gates and immediately want to tell everyone what you want, because you have to learn what they want first. And that takes a good listener. And to be disciplined enough to listen first and speak second, I think is one of the essential qualities that a lot of our female candidates possess. And it's what makes them good candidates, but better than that, it's what makes them good public servants.
Right, Erin?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think that there's data out there that show that women in legislatures get more legislation passed. They get more gender salient legislation passed, which is frustrating. But when it comes to healthcare, education, family policy, right? Like women just get more stuff done on that, and it is because more of those responsibilities continue to fall to us. More of that, it's more in the forefront for us, and we're impacted by policies differently, right? And again, this is a thing that is not limited to politics. In science and in research, particularly medical research, they were doing breast cancer research on all men until there were women in the room to say, like, hey, maybe we should do this differently, right? And so it's not necessarily, again, it's nothing inherent. It's that different policies hit us differently because we walk through the world in a different way. And it's when you think about government, it's just a big decision-making table, right? And when you think about getting good decisions, you want to see as many sides of every issue as you can, right? If you're only looking at one tiny part of an issue, you're not going to get a good decision, which means you're not going to get good policy, which is how we end up with policy that impacts people in disproportionately bad ways, because they weren't at the table to say, hey, wait, in my community, this is what happens when a policy is enacted in this way, right? We could get a lot more stuff right the first time if we had different people around the table. And it's also why we need more women and more people of color, because we are not a monolith. right? None of us, like neither the lieutenant governor nor I go, like, we don't speak for all women, right? And it's crazy to think that we would. And so we need lots of different women in public office, right? Because their lives are different and their perspectives are different, and that's how we're going to get better policy.
But we are all experts in our field. We are all experts in being mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives. We are experts in giving birth. We're the only gender that does it. We're experts, and that's why probably we had the great authority on school boards early on, because it's our children who go to the schools. We make the lion's share of healthcare decisions. Women make 85% of consumer household decisions. We head 4 out of 10 American households. We're 54% of the electorate. We're experts in what we do. And so for us to run for political office from that point of expertise is valuable.
So I'm going to go back to Erin on this, and this is a question. And I'm going to ask you, you mentioned before about the gender gap, but this question says, are there big disparities? I don't think I asked this before. Are there big disparities in the parties and how many women are represented by Democrats or Republicans? Are there more Democratic female office holders, or are there more Republicans? And is that reflected in what you called the gender gap earlier, Erin?
Yes. So it did not used to be as pronounced as it is now. And in fact, some of the data that talked about, women being more collaborative and what women got done was in part because a lot of the women who were in the Republican Party were more moderate, and a lot of those women are gone because of the Republican move to the right. Not all of them, obviously. There are still, but their numbers are decreasing in women's representation, and our numbers are increasing. And you see that with voters, like I said before, and that gap between who women are voting for. You also see it in elected office. Like it's the right now, and this has not always been true, and it is my sincere hope that it's not true in the future, because we're not going to get to parity if Democrats are the only ones electing women. We're just not, because we would have to elect 100% women on our side, basically, to make that happen, and that's not going to happen. So right now, women are voting for and running as Democrats in much, much higher numbers than as Republicans. And from my perspective, it's a matter of policy. And it's a matter of the standard bearer of their party being really gross and not respectful of women, and policies that don't respect us and don't treat us well.
Okay, to former Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch, so is the gender gap reflective of how many Democratic women are in office versus Republican women?
Well, Jeff, I don't want to get into a proxy presidential debate on WisPolitics today, but I will say that Erin is correct in her statistics. Anyone can read about them. There are more Democrat women serving today than Republican women, which is what I aim to change. And so many other women and men across this country, with organizations like Maggie's List and the Susan B. Anthony List and Right Women Right Now, which is an organization I helped co-found when I was at the Republican State Leadership Committee. We are really committed to making sure that the ranks of women in the GOP in elected office continue to grow, because Erin's right. We want a diverse group of women serving. And if they all come from one political party, that's not the diverse ideology that we're looking for in good governance, especially not in a state like Wisconsin, where we're very purple. We're a 50-50 state. That's one of the challenges, but one of the things I absolutely love about our state and raising 2 bright daughters in it, that we can bring great ideas to the table, have wonderful debates about them, and we can move this state forward, fulfill our motto just by having the right people in elected office. But I think having the right people in elected office requires more women at the table.
All right, let's just stay with you, Becky. Here's another question. Would more women in office ease the hardcore partisanship in Wisconsin?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, you care to elaborate.
That was a really clear answer. There was a period at the end of it. Like I mentioned before, I think collaboration is one of the key skills and a really important arrow in the quiver of a female candidate and just a woman in general. I think there is sometimes a default to a collaborative mindset, a compromise mindset where you don't necessarily compromise your values, but you work to assure that everyone is satisfied with an outcome in taking perhaps a smaller step toward an end goal, but still with that end goal in mind. I don't think that Democrats want ill for the people of Wisconsin, nor would I believe that Erin feels that way about Republicans. But we both have a very different way of getting to ultimately what the American dream for every Wisconsinite would look like. And so I think compromise is really, really important. I think if we did have more women at the table, we would get there faster. And that's something that gets me excited because I look at my friends, Kristi Noem in South Dakota and my dear friend Kim Reynolds in Iowa, and I see the great things that they are able to accomplish. And I think we could do that in Wisconsin too. Women in leadership does have a collaborative sense about it. You can see it on corporate boards and corporations. I think you can see it in governance as well.
Okay, Erin, what's your thought on whether women could stop the hardcore partisanship in Wisconsin?
I mean, I think it would certainly help. I think again, I think it would help, and I hope we figure something out because I really do. It's hard right now to feel like anybody is able to get anything done, and I don't think that that's what the people of Wisconsin want. Like,
right. Mm-hmm. And this kind of goes to what we talked about before, the deterrence. And there's another question here about, if a woman does succeed in getting to legislature, that's not exactly the most family-friendly or female-friendly place. Bad hours, male-dominated. Maybe it's not like, wow, I really, for a woman, I really want to be in that environment. Could the legislature, this is the question from the audience member, could the legislature do things better to make it a more family-friendly or a more appealing place for women? Let's just start with you, Erin.
I mean, I think yes. I think that basically all workplaces have some work to do when it comes to that. I think that it has gotten better to a degree. I also think that legislative pay is an issue. It can be, that can be very challenging for people, especially for people who don't have, who aren't attorneys or have jobs that can really work around the legislature. I think that it is, it's something that's surmountable with a good support infrastructure, which again is part of what we try to help women build. But it can always be much better than it is.
Okay, what about you, former Lieutenant Governor Rebecca?
Well, actually, I've seen it up close, Jeff. The change over the last number of years. Joel was in the legislature for 14 years. And when he started out, I was at home with Ella. Very shortly thereafter, had Violet. And I remember Joel being at work until 3-4 o'clock in the morning and driving home then after really lengthy debates. He was on the Joint Finance Committee, which, as you know, one of the most powerful budget writing committees in America during the Act 10 protests. And Joel would be on the road in many cases for 48 hours. And we would just be at home watching what was going on with Joel through the TV screen. That type of thing would never happen today. Speaker Voss has changed the rules so they aren't debating into the wee hours of the night every single time they go to the floor. And I think those rule changes have really made these jobs a lot more family friendly. And as I've been talking to women to recruit them to run for political office this time around, that's something that I can honestly say I have seen and experienced with my own eyes. And I think these jobs actually can be quite flexible. You can spend more time in your home district as opposed to having office hours only in Madison. Perhaps you decide to do more town halls. If you have children, can bring your children with you to those town halls. I think that there is a lot more acceptance today compared to way back when in 2010 when I ran for a political office. And I think today's candidates are looking at a different landscape, much more flexibility than 10, 20 years ago here in Wisconsin.
And
right, and certainly easier. Okay, go ahead, Erin. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to add briefly that Treasurer Godlewski, right, was the first constitutional officer to give birth while in office, and she essentially had to figure out how to write her own maternity leave policy because we didn't have one, because we never needed it before, right? And which is sort of messed up, along with the rest of the stuff we're talking about. Like, we're talking about this as a barrier for women, which it is, and it's the world we live in, but we're also sort of accepting that as the default, as if it's completely fine for men to not have to worry about any of these family responsibilities, right? And it's not fine. It's there if you're a heterosexual couple and and you have kids, there are two responsible adults for those kids, right? And
right.
I think we have to keep challenging that and keep talking about that until women candidates stop getting questions like, well, what about your kids, when men aren't being asked those questions.
Indeed, and I agree that women shouldn't be asked those questions as if this was the first day that they thought, oh, I have children, I should have thought about that before I ran for political office, because I totally understand that. But I actually also understand what it's like to have two little girls that I'm raising during 8 years of serving in statewide office. And while it is unimaginable that the treasurer had to write her own maternity leave policy in the year 2020 or 2019, as the case may be, I also think it's an opportunity to be a trailblazer. And the more women that we have serving in political office, the more trails we blaze and the more opportunities we have to tamp down the grass for the girls and women who come behind us. Because I sure as heck one day hope that the two daughters I'm raising today will have the opportunity for some trailblazer woman to reach a hand back and help them along in the way I am trying to help along women today. Because I think that's one of the coolest things that we can do as females in elected office and those who are helping women achieve elected office is mentor and blaze trails for those who will come behind us. That's one of the many reasons we celebrate the great victory of ballot box equality this year.
Okay, so time for a couple more questions. One from the audience member, and then the closing one from me. So I'm going to stay with Becky here because you didn't need media training, but this person asked, how does one get media training if you're a candidate? So, so again, you like leapfrogged everybody because you didn't do local office and you didn't need media training. So anyway.
Sure. So there are a number of different resources. I would recommend if you're thinking about running or even being a campaign manager for someone's campaign to consider going to a campaign school or a candidate school. Obviously, our caucuses in the state legislature will probably be offering something like that for their candidates and their nominees in each of the districts. But there are others that are offered. I'm sure Emerge has media training inside your candidate training package, and I know American Majority has the same type of offerings. There are a variety of different county political parties that offer these types of trainings, and media training is one of those things that you can Google at this point. You can do interview practice questions. You know that I'm the jobs ambassador for Associated Builders and Contractors. That was one of the seminars that we offered at our super convention this year. I put on a seminar on media training, because you never know when you're going to need to know how to answer questions, sometimes until it's too late.
Okay, Erin, Emerge does media training, right?
We sure do, yes. And we're certainly not the only ones on our side. Wisconsin Progress does training for men and women. It's a different structure than ours, but they do a great job. And there are a ton of resources on the internet and lots of training available. So yes, and Anyway, yeah, feel free to reach out if you're looking for something really specific. I can help direct, but there's a ton of resources out there now.
Right, Google Emerge Wisconsin, and you can contact Erin, and whom would you contact on the Republican side, Becky?
You're going to want to either contact, if you're running for Wisconsin State Assembly or State Senate, you're going to want to contact one of those organizations. But otherwise, female candidates, Maggie's list, the SBA list, or the Republican Party of Wisconsin.
Okay, so now here's my closing question, and I want to start with Erin on this one. So you talked about 18 being kind of the year of the woman, and I'm wondering whether is 2020, are we going to look back on 2020 as the year of the female candidate, and what's your optimism going forward? I mean, this is, I guess, a closing statement, if you will, on where things are going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that we obviously continue to make the progress that we're making. One of the problems that we have for women's representation in Wisconsin right now is gerrymandering. And again, going back to, hasn't always been the case, won't always be the case. But right now, when maps are rigged against Democrats, they're rigged against women, people of color, and LGBTQ people who are running for office, because predominantly we're running as Democrats. And so that's a problem, right? Like, we had some of the most phenomenal candidates I've ever seen in my life in 2018. And they were running in districts that the math was never going to be there for them. And that's really, it's hard, and it's not fair, and it's small d democratic. And I think we have to do better. And there are so many ways now to do better. So that's certainly part of it. But I am definitely optimistic about, we have some really phenomenal candidates running again this cycle. This spring, there were a ton of women who saw a lot of success and are now, settling into leading their communities through incredibly challenging times, right? And it's going to be, the next couple of years are going to be a really hard time to serve in elected office. We're going to be facing just truly unprecedented challenges. But I think that we have a lot of candidates who are up to the task and who are really looking forward to making the case to their community that they should be the ones helping to make those decisions. Okay,
former Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch, what's your feeling about the year 2020 as the year of the woman, and going forward, how optimistic are you about placing more women in public office?
I'm incredibly optimistic, Jeff. I think the future is ours. I think fulfilling our state's motto forward is going to be something that women will continue to do in the Republican Party, not just in 2020, but well into the future. Susan B. Anthony once said this very famous quote, "Failure is impossible." And I think when you have bright conservative women working together, failure is impossible. I was raised by a small business owner mom and envelope salesman dad to believe that I was equal to any boy. My sister feels the same way. And I'm raising my daughters in that way too, so that one day they can look back on 2020 and all the years moving forward and say, every year was the year of the woman.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch, and Emerge Wisconsin leader Erin Forrest. Thank you also to our sponsors again, Hush Blackwell, American Family Insurance, Excel Energy, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Hospital Association. Thanks for all of you for tuning in. Go to WisPolitics.com to find out more about our events, including the June 11th virtual event on the ag crisis in Wisconsin and June 22nd event with Congressman Brian Stile. This is Jeff Mayers signing off, and thank you very much for being part of this program.